Welcome to the presentation of NAREE's 14th Annual Robert Bruss Real Estate Book Awards. We're here to recognize excellence in books covering the broad field of real estate that were published in 2020. We're honored to have several book award winners at NAREE's 55th Annual Real Estate Journalism Conference here in Miami. I'm NAREE President Jeff Collins, and with me is NAREE Vice President Eileen Woods of the Boston Globe, and she's going to assist me in presenting the awards. This year, some of our book award winners are journalists, and after the awards, we'll hear a little bit about their journey from journalist to author with some highlights about their award-winning books. So now let's present the winners along with the judges' comments. We'll start with the winners being honored for the Leigh Robinson First Time Author Award, and there's a tie. Let's start with the winning authors, Rhonda Kaysen and Michelle Higgins. Congratulations. This is for your book, The New York Times Right at Home, How to Buy, Decorate, Organize, and Maintain Your Space by Black Dog and Leventhal Publishers. Rhonda and Michelle are here to accept their awards. And while we get their certificates ready, the judges say this book is nearly perfect for a new would-be homebuyer. It's clear, thorough, and highly readable. Although it covers well-trodden ground, it's rich with contemporary tips like writing letters to sellers to win out the bidding war and scooping out homes before they hit the market. And now, our next winner, tied in this category for Best New Author, is Connor Doherty, who wrote Golden Gates, The Housing Crisis, and A Reckoning for the American Dream. This is by Penguin Books. Unfortunately, Connor couldn't be here today. The judges' comments are important and hugely readable. America's housing crisis is broad and complex. The author explores it with skilled reporter storytelling. He looks at how we got here. And now, moving on to the Bronze Award. This award goes to Brian Burke for The Hands-Off Investor, an insider's guide to investing in passive real estate syndications by BiggerPockets Publishing. Brian could not be here today. The judge's comment was valuable tool for passive investors, a good starting place and helpful reference for those with more experience. This year's winner of NAREE's Silver Award is Jamie Gold for her book Wellness by Design by Toll Press, and Jamie is here to accept her award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The judge's comment. The author is a space designer, not a real estate professional, and she has produced a lovely eye candy book. It could be coffee table material, yet happens to be loaded with wisdom. She gives a good examination of the emerging trends geared towards younger readers, with lots of emphasis on spaces for workouts for athletes, while including information valuable to seniors and people with disabilities. Congratulations. And now, for this year's gold winner, the author is journalist Ryan Dezember. He wins top honors for his book, Underwater, How Our American Dream of Homeownership Became a Nightmare, published by Thomas Dunne Books. And Brian is here to accept his reward. Congratulations. Brian also works for the Wall Street Journal. This book combines a journalist's skilled storytelling with his personal and a relatable saga, the judges said. Valuable information for readers. The housing crash in 2007/8 gave investors a blank check as they got hungry for houses. They even built new ones to rent because so many people could not afford to buy. Well documented, such as statistics on home ownership at certain ages. Love the comments. Bland as an egg inside out. They never sing songs about a pile of rent receipts. Congratulations to our book award winners. Eileen, go ahead. Eileen and I also would like to thank our esteemed panel of judges for their time and expertise in naming this year's winners. Some of Eileen would like to take it from here and tell us a little bit about who our judges are. I'll take care of this.
We'll have to get that handoff of the baton down before the Olympics. Congratulations. NAREE's panel of judges they have many decades of experience as editors. Alan Norwood is a freelance writer and former editor of the Charlotte Observer. Stephanie Murphy-Lupo is the author of several books and a former newspaper editor, columnist, and writer for the Palm Beach Daily News and the Boca Raton News. June Fletcher is a former reporter, editor, and author who wrote for the Wall Street Journal, Builder Magazine, and the Naples Daily News. Her book, House Poor, was published by HarperCollins. NAREE's Bruss Book Awards program is named for the late Robert Bruss, a former syndicated real estate columnist, prolific writer, and longtime NAREE leader. Bruss wrote reviews of realty books. The Bruss Book Awards are sponsored by NAREE past presidents, including the late Leigh Robinson, founder of Express Publishing, and author of Landlording, and Brad Inman, founder of Inman News. And now let's talk to our winners about going from journalists to authors, and hear a little bit about their wonderful books. Back to you, Mr. President.
The authors that you see before them all have written some wonderful books. They've broken fresh ground. For example, the book on how to buy a home is how to buy real estate. There's a million selections in the Barnes & Noble shelves, but this one goes quite a bit deeper and quite a bit beyond it. Wellness by Design is full of great tips. I told my wife before I came here, we're going to have to redesign or figure out something to do about our kitchen floor because she's always exhausted after working in the kitchen. And tile floors, ceramic tile floors, I read in Jamie's book, are perhaps some of the hardest surfaces to work on. Ryan's book is a dream. It's just totally readable, and yet it explains the whole crisis, the housing crash, in great detail, and very understandable, with all kinds of surprises in there that I didn't even know about. For example, the majority of home buyers or underwater homeowners did not walk away from their mortgages. So I think I'll start at the far end of the table. And Ryan, I want to ask you how you went from, reporter working on a story at the Orange, at the Mobile Register. I almost said the Orange County Register.
No, it's the press register.
I enjoyed that throughout the book you kept talking about getting my article for the Register, so I felt like a colleague. You were telling me yesterday that it all started with you telling your boss, I have to go to Alabama to take care of a problem I'm having with the house, and that led to a story, and that somehow led to the book. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, so I was working at the Wall Street Journal, covering all sorts of things, and including Wall Street buying up homes. I was covering Blackstone, and they were, we're spending $150 million a week on foreclosed homes, and like, well, that's a story. And covering that, I, had my own, I had a personal interest because I had also become a landlord, much less successful than Blackstone. And I, went into my editor's office to ask, I need to take next week off. I have to drive to Alabama. I have to fix up this house I have and try to sell it. And she was just like, wait, what? How did I not know this? And it lined up that it was, 10 years from the crash. And we were, as it would happen, looking for stories to commemorate the crash 10 years later, as newspapers love to do. And, she was like, let's do a first person thing about you selling the house. And I was like, only if I sell the house. I will not touch a keyboard. I don't want to jinx it, but and try to sell this thing. And you know, I did sell a house and wrote an essay for the journal about it, and that led to the book. I had sort of had a half a book worth of stuff from when I lived in Alabama and saw the rise and the craziness of the real estate market. A lot of buildings like we see out the windows that were empty. And then I had sort of half of a book with Wall Street, you know, running around with briefcase, you know, duffel bags of cash buying foreclosed homes. And sort of like what I didn't realize until other people told me was that like I could be the connective tissue because I had gone through the process that, you know, of my house had gone through sort of the same arc of a lot of these other properties. And I probably would never have thought of that on my own because it was like sort of an internal like dilemma and crazy thing I was dealing with like after work hours for a decade. And it sort of took other people to say, this is a thing. And then, you know, once the story came out, then as happens sometimes, book agents will call you. They're always, you know, running around looking for the next thing to sell or pitch and the next client to sign up. So that's sort of how it happened. Just connecting those three things with myself in between.
There's sort of like three elements in your story. One is your personal experience with as being a homeowner during the housing crisis, and the other is your experience covering the Mobile coast, the Alabama coastal property boom and bust. I imagine that a lot of that came from stories you actually wrote.
Yes, yeah, it was a sort of deep dive into my personal archives and some of the other reporters that I worked with over the years, including our then real estate columnist. Now I think she's a realtor now. It just shows you how the business has gone. But it was just sort of an exercise in pulling those together. Of course, there was some reporting. I had to go back to a lot of people that I was really nervous about going back to, including some people who had come out of prison and were still kind of cross with me over things that had happened a decade earlier. So it was sort of...
Was that the mayor?
Yeah, he was actually he was okay. It was a lot of the bankrupt developers and the people who were bribing the mayor who went to prison for doling out zoning to build things like that where houses used to be. It was sort of, but a lot of it did come from just the archives, and you realize like when you cover a beat for so long, you sort of have a good narrative arc. What I didn't really have, I had a great cast and a great setting, but I didn't have that like sort of singular character. And again, it was sort of like counterintuitive. Like journalists are always looking for like the perfect character or vehicle to tell the story. And like it took some editors in New York to be like, it's you, Tommy. Like you're like, this is the thing. You're like the everyman in the situation. Like you represent millions of people who went through something similar. And like I think that was sort of that's when the light bulb went off. And it was very uncomfortable, of course. But that was sort of, you know, a lot of it was already there, and it was just a matter of like organizing, putting it together, following up with things and people to see how things had turned out. And like, I can't imagine how people wrote books before like the advent of Google Docs and spreadsheets and things like that to keep it all straight. But it was sort of like a very, you know, you think of like the writer alone in the cabin in the woods, and really it's like a guy with like a Google Doc and like a bunch of folders and things in front of the computer, just sort of organizing things that they've already done in small little pieces.
So I'm going to ask you one more question. We'll move on to the other panelists. But then you marry all of this personal and local data to the big national picture. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, the equity funds swooping in to buy up all the foreclosures, creating the rental housing industry, and then all the statistics about all the people who did not do a strategic walk away. So how did you who suggested that, or how did you come up with the idea of doing that and tying it back to your own home?
I think I had seen something like from CoreLogic or somebody who put out like their like quarterly or annual like equity reports, and I think that was sort of like, okay, that's the big number, and what's the little number? And unfortunately, with real estate in most places, it's all there for the public record. So it's like, okay, there's 100 some odd houses in my subdivision. Let me focus on that, and I'll just go through all the deeds and records and find out which ones foreclosed in that period of time. And it ended up being in my like circular subdivision like 1 out of every 3, which was pretty shocking. These were not like big. These are like 120 $20,000 to $170,000 houses at the time. So not like, these are like working regular people. And it was sort of like, okay, we can have like CoreLogic or somebody do the big data and use their methodology and their big brains and computers, and I can just go through and spend the time like flipping through the, you know, the little county record website to find every house. Okay, what happened to this one? What happened to that one? And so it was like, you know, using all these people that we have here in this data, but then drilling down to like a very micro level of one neighborhood.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and I recommend it for everyone. I want to move to this end of the table, panelists, and tell us about the work you were doing with the columns you were writing for the New York Times, and how that translated into a book, and a different kind of how to buy a home book.
Sure. So Rhonda and I have both been columnists for the New York Times for a long time, writing about real estate, home decor, and all things home, basically, for a number of years. I was the solo staff reporter for the Sunday real estate section for, 6 years. You know, Rhonda and I became colleagues because Rhonda was writing multiple columns for the same section, and we got together over coffee, and you know, Rhonda really initiated the idea, saying, hey, you know, I think between our portfolio of work, we have a book here, and we started brainstorming ideas on, okay, agreed, how would we package it? And repackage some of the content, but also, you know, create new content for the book. And so we started talking about the life stages of a home buyer, going from, you know, maybe getting the keys to your first apartment, maybe you're renting first, maybe you moved in with roommates, to, you know, moving in with a significant other, to, you know, wanting to buy a first home. How do you go about doing that? How do you decorate it on the cheap? And, you know, how do you maintain that home going forward? And then, like, you know, how do you add a kid's room? How do you downsize? You know, how do you make a decor work when you and your significant other styles completely clash? You know, and all of the things that we had written about over the years. And we also had done some smarter living guides, digital guides for the New York Times that were almost like mini books in themselves. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, actually, I think it was the organizing guide that I mentioned. I almost forgot about that. I think it was the home organizing guide that I did for Smarter Living, where it was a challenge we did. It was a 6 weeks to organize your home, and so it was for subscribers, and it was a new platform we were working with, and it was very interactive with readers. And by the time I was done with it, I felt like, wow, this is a ton of material, and I started to think that there was something bigger that we could do. And I started to look at the larger market and thought, well, there's books on buying, and there's books on decorating, and there's books on organizing, but there isn't something that sort of puts it together holistically, and sort of offers readers an authoritative point of view that's not coming from one aesthetic. And I just, you know, Michelle and I knew each other from over the years, and I felt that we had, she came with a great design, the fixed column, which was the design column, and I had the right at home column, which was kind of how we live in our homes. And so, you know, we started to see this idea that could take shape. And then, speaking about the Google Docs, like once we started going, we lived in a shared Google Doc for about a year of just passing edits back and forth between the two of us, and that process was really fascinating because we both co-byline stories, but we had never worked on a 100,000 word whatever this is in the end project together, and trying to collect the art for the book. Michelle definitely did the heavy lifting on photos, and and how do you think about illustrations in a way that pushes sort of an overarching narrative forward, rather than, as a reporter, you're always in those one story that you've got to get your story about. And this was sort of how do we talk in the beginning about saving for a down payment, or how much money do you put toward a down payment, and how do we connect that to, how do you lay out your living room design?
Yeah, and I guess just going back to your initial, how do we come up with the idea question, one of the things I think that as we got talking really resonated with both of us is we also have lived this, right? So while we've been learning and writing and interviewing experts about everything from, how to win a bidding war to like, you know, making sure you get the right rug when you get a new puppy so they don't destroy it, you know, in your home. Like, we had this body of knowledge from expert sources that we really wanted to share with our readers in a way that we didn't find that when we were doing it ourselves, right? Because a lot of our columns come from, you know, talking to sources and what's happening trend-wise, but also from personal experience. Like, you get a pandemic puppy and they destroy your living room. I mean, what, you know, let's ask the expert about that, right? Because we were able to do that through our columns at the time.
We also included that in the book. We had the little sections that's sort of our own personal experience, which I thought kind of gave it a little, I don't know, it's kind of fun. But yeah, and I think that, anyway.
Jamie, I want to find out, you've written several books on home design. You write a column for the Union Tribune, San Diego Union Tribune about home design, and also the Tampa Tribune, I believe, your column appeared. How did it morph into the idea of a book about designing your home so that it makes you feel better, makes you healthier, makes you fitter? Or how did that light bulb go off for you?
It was something that I had lived, you know, just like Rhonda and Michelle were saying, you bring your own personal experience. And after, I guess, 8+ years of writing features every month for the UT, and I actually write for Kitchen and Bath Design News because I have a background as a certified kitchen designer. So I practiced this for clients. I had my own experience buying a home and making it comfortable. And you just realize that there's a strong link between your home and your health and how it's supporting it or how it's sabotaging it. And I thought this is something that more people would benefit from knowing. And I had pitched it to my previous publisher of the first 2 books when I was finishing up the second book, which is a book about bathrooms in the end of 2016. My editor said, "So what are you burning to write?" And I said, "I'd really like to write a book about, you know, how your home can support your health." And he thought it was a great idea. We went through the proposal stage, and then, you know, he couldn't get the powers that be to say yes. So I said, "Well, I think that there's something here." He thought there was something there. So I went and found an agent, and Simon Schuster was thinking there's a whole trend of wellness happening, and we should be looking at the home side too. And that's how this third book happened. And I was really glad it wasn't my first book, because this is the one that I really, really wanted to write for years. And having had the experience of getting past the terror of writing your first book, where it seems so huge, and you think, well, this is just a lot of articles. I'm going to think of this as, you know, this many articles, each on a topic, and pull that together into a book. And with the second book on bathrooms, well, I had that process nailed. So when I got to the third, which was my idea, not a publisher's, I kind of had the process set. So it made it a lot easier. I could focus on what I had learned myself, what I wanted to share with readers and with the public, and kind of go from there. And then the pandemic happened. And a lot more people started realizing there's a lot of links between your home and your health. So.
I'm interested to hear how our other panelists went from, you know, actually got publisher interest. How did you go from writing a book to getting a publisher interested and engaged? Ryan, you want to?
Well, I was fortunate enough to have someone come to me that knew what to do. And that, I would recommend that. Like, I've had colleagues who have done it without an agent, and they might get a little bit more on the front end financially because they're not sharing with somebody. But there were things from like structure and negotiating and the contract and things. I was like, oh, this looks great. He's no. This is, you know, there's things that you would never think of. And they go from being sort of like a business manager and like an idea person to sort of an editor, sort of like a psychiatrist / bartender, you know, like to kind of pull you through the ups and downs, like I'm sure everyone experiences on normal stories, just every day. And I think that that's like the key. I wouldn't have known what the heck to do, and I probably would have never done anything. I had talked to some other agents, and they were like, wanting me to do different things than what I sort of had on my plate. And this guy came along and was like, no, do your thing. You know, they shop it around, they send out a pitch. You write a pitch, which is just as terrifying as the book because it's pretty long. And they shop it around and do all that for you. And then you sort of go over the feedback with them. You sort of look at, okay, these people want to do it as is. These people want to have a meeting and but want you to do something sort of different. And the great counsel that this agent told me was like, no, don't do that. You'll spin your wheels for free. You'll be doing something and you'll end up, you know, even if it's more money or a more prestigious sort of publisher or whatever it is, or editor, go with what you have and do your book instead of trying to like accommodate. There's a whole segment of writers who are for hire to do the things that the book companies want, and that's sort of a separate thing. And when you're sort of adapting what you're reporting to a book, you kind of just, you know, want to go with what you have, I think. And that was like kind of the good advice, and that's sort of what led us to these people to do this book.
I've actually done both. My first 2 books were work for hire, and that is, as you say, it's a different model. And I found for my 3rd book, since it was my concept and it wasn't on that basis, having an agent was invaluable, and I strongly recommend it. And there are people who come to you. I ended up, going and finding an agent, but it made the process so much simpler, and there are so many rights that you may not even think about that it's their job to think about.
So our process was a bit unique, I think, in that the Times has its own book manager. So when Rhonda and I got together for coffee, and after we kind of had our pitch in mind, I sent him an email and said, do you want to get coffee? And we met in the Times cafeteria for like 45 minutes. And he said, I think this is great. I'm going to shop it around. And like a week later or something, like it was
really fast. It was like
time. We had like 3 interested.
So we had a first right. So we had a meeting. So it was maybe like May, June. So maybe a month later. I remember he said Memorial Day is coming up, and then it was sort of right around then. So we had a meeting with a publisher. But a little like what Ryan was saying, we did meet with a number of publishers, and they do each have their idea. So you meet with the team, the editors, and the marketing team. And we both had a very clear vision of what the book was, and I think that when we had a few options to choose from in terms of what's they're bidding on the book, we felt that Black Dog saw our vision and visually was sort of in line with what we were thinking, and so I really agree that it always was our book. I feel that we had in the end our relationship with our editor at Black Dog was someone we really liked in the meetings, and she really pushed throughout the process as we wrote it to sort of keep our vision of what we wanted. And the New York Times' role really served as our agent and helped negotiate the deal for us, and then really let us lead. But the Times gave us quite a bit of freedom, that it was always our book, and they liked our idea and shepherded it for us. And so in some ways we were very fortunate we didn't have to go shopping for an agent, but I think I completely agree that you need that advocate. And I felt that throughout the process we had the book that we wanted, and we had say in the illustrations, and we had complete control over what photos we used. And throughout the editing process, remember that time with Lisa, we met with her in the office, and we were like, the pages were up and we were moving things around, and her edits were always to help propel the vision that we had, and that way it was incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that, as you were saying, in terms of working with someone who could kind of keep you going through the process, since we didn't necessarily have that, since the Times was effectively our agent, the company that is, like Rhonda and I really leaned on each other, and I know that I couldn't have pulled it off without her, because we needed someone to, when we're like, oh my God, I'm on deadline today, can you answer the publisher on this question? Like that kind of thing, like that really propelled us. So because we didn't have an agent we could be continuing to turn to for that, we turned to each other. And because there was that unique kind of content sharing we had at the time, since we were repurposing some of our articles or rewriting them completely in some cases, we also negotiated hard with the Times on the contract as well.
Now, Ryan mentioned that he didn't know how people wrote books before Google Docs and spreadsheets, and I certainly understand what he's getting at. Can you, Ryan, talk a little bit more about your process and how you kept on track and the self-discipline involved?
Yeah, so the Journal doesn't have a book manager, but they, as you might imagine, reporters have written quite a few books over the years. And so there's various processes. Some people take unpaid time off. I didn't really, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep working on the day job, and so I sort of had an agreement that I'll keep reporting on this single-family rental thing and like do stories, and then then put them in the book as I go. And they were happy with that. So I did, and I don't really recommend this, but I did 4 days in the office working for the paper, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday at home in an office working on the book for about a year. And what I did was, I just, because I had written stories in Alabama for the paper there, and then stories for the Journal, and then had this one long one that was sort of the connective tissue, I literally started with a spreadsheet and just putting, dates, the headline, all the stuff that goes in the back of the book, which is like a nightmare to compile later. That was other good advice from the agent, like do that as you go. And that actually scared me enough to do that as a way to like sort of outline the narrative, because it was chronological basically. And then it was just a matter of, sort of going through those stories, pulling relevant details, figuring out who I needed to, I had to catch up with everybody because I couldn't separate myself from the Journal's policies of reporting, and no surprises, we're very strict about that. And that sort of showed me where I needed to do more reporting, where I remembered things but wanted to make sure they're factual, so I had to head down to Alabama to the courthouse and pull files 1 week and things like that. And it was literally just that, with hyperlinks, and then as I went, it was what did that guy say, or what was that project called? And then it was just sort of all there on the side of my screen, and it made it a lot easier than I imagined it would have been if I just sort of was staring at that blinking cursor on the blank page. And it was sort of like I don't want to say cut and paste, but there was a lot of that to start, and then sort of shaping and chopping away what wasn't needed.
Jamie, how about you? You've written several books, so you must have quite the process nailed down.
Well, I'm a big fan of Excel, and I will create a workbook for a book, and it starts out with essentially what was the table of contents. And the table of contents, each element is its own line, and I will put in what dates I need to have that done by. And then it's done. And that would be the first worksheet. And I'm tracking my time, so I want to make sure I'm getting more than minimum wage when this whole thing, breaks out at the end. So that first worksheet is key. And then I'll have worksheets for all the related information. Each chapter in this book has a house call section where I'm interviewing a medical expert on something that relates to it, whether it's ergonomics for laundry rooms, whether it's sitting as a new smoking and why you need movement for a home office space. So I had to track all of those. Did I get the answers back from the health professional? Do I have their the correct certifications? Did I verify that? And then so each part of it has its own tab, its own worksheet within that workbook. And even though I have backup software on my computer, I would still email it to myself every Friday, just as a supplementary backup. Because if that thing was lost, that would be process destroyed.
You two, I understand that you relied on each other to handle the publisher, as you said, but it takes a certain amount of teamwork and a good working relationship to make something like your project happen. So how did you handle the division of labor and the workload?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. So we decided to split it up by Michelle would take the lead on the buying chapter and the designing chapter because she wrote the 6th column and she had written this Smarter Living Guide on how to buy a home. And then I would do organizing and maintaining. Since that was sort of my wheelhouse, we both had a shared wheelhouse in the buying section, but we decided that we would each be responsible for half the book. So that gave us sort of a path. And then as we would be working, if I had articles or research that would help her, I would send it along to her and say, hey, this is an article that you might want. And so we had a shared Google document where we worked on, where we put all of our sections. And so we had them each broken down into separate sections. And we didn't initially give each other the work to edit until we were at a place where we felt like it was ready to show. So we each kind of respected each other's space and process as we worked. And then I would say, okay, Michelle, do you want to look at what I have? And she would look at, and in the comments section, would leave comments and notes. And she would say, look, I wrote an article about
kitchen organizing.
Kitchen organizing. You might want to use that. You might want to talk to this organizer. She was great. She could add that for you. And so she would sort of give me that suggestion, and we would go back and forth throughout that process. And as we got closer to then submitting the original document, we would read through the entire thing together. So that shared Google Doc was fantastic because, you know, she lived in Brooklyn, I was in New Jersey, so we very rarely met face to face. We mostly were just completely over this Google Doc and cell phones. And then that sort of gave us each our independence, and also, you know, we each brought different hats. So, you know, I would be more of an editor on the sections she wrote, and she would be more the editor on the sections I wrote. And so, and that would be really strengthened it because, you know, each section had a writer and an editor. And I think it really made for a stronger book overall. And then we had to sort of think about how do we make sure there's a seamlessness so it doesn't read like it's written by two different people. And part of why I think we collaborated to begin with is that I think we both have a similar style of writing. So we both have a very conversational voice. We both have a very accessible voice, so it wasn't that big of a heavy lift. But there were certainly parts, you know, where we felt like we have to make sure it feels that it's one book and not two separate books.
Right, and I think that collaborative, like, I'm writing these and then you're gonna take a look and edit and vice versa, that also helped with the cohesion because we were able to kind of like, you know, kind of shake off the edges, infuse our voices into the other chapters. And as we did that, I think that's when we realized, hey, I have a personal story to share, let's pepper that in. And we started infusing some personal stories about, like, you know, redoing our apartments or, you know, buying our first homes, that kind of thing. And that also gave it a sense of, like a sense of personality, I think, frankly, that many home buying guides or decor don't necessarily have. That is, again, drawing from expertise, not just one person whose style it is, you know what I mean? So we wanted to share with our readers, this is what we learned from the experts, take what you will from it and use it on your own, versus this is how I'm, like, you know, some glossy coffee table books are like, this is how this designer does it, and you take their style on. That's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to provide like tools, a toolkit basically, that you could turn to again and again depending on where you are in the home buying stage.
So once you've written your book, you have to turn it into the publisher and you go through the editing process. What was that like? Did they make you do rewrites? Sure.
Yeah, certainly.
Start with you.
Yeah, so we had a deadline. I think I remember it was like March 15th or something in March. So we had a deadline. Then maybe 2 months later, we got the first round of edits back, which was, if I recall, still in a Google Doc at that point. And so we went through those. That took, you know, that there was one round where we went through her questions and added things, and then the second round starts to come in a PDF. And that was where we start to make sure there, you know, some of it was layout issues. So there would be, you know, we have these chunky text sections and something would run over, so we have to cut it short. There'd be things where just aesthetically, because it's a visual book, it would run to the edge of a page, and do we make trims to have things fit? So that was quite an involved process, and that was when we, again, met with the editor in person. At some point we had to go in and physically look at each page and go through it page by page to try to figure out, okay, this page is running too long, now we have just, 2 lines on a page all by itself, what are we gonna cut? And there are sometimes we go, let's move this section over into here and it'll fill it out. So that was quite a heavy lift. It took a lot longer than I imagined it was going to. I wasn't expecting that part.
Yeah, I feel like because we were editing each other's work and we've been longtime columnists for the New York Times, in fact, I think our editor said to us, she just mostly copy edited and then looked for holes where she thought, oh, well, I'd really like a section on decorating, window treatments or something like that you didn't include, and then that's where we needed to go and report and bring back. But for us, the layout was the big challenge because it was such a visual book.
And there are issues with how things were formatted would end up, it sounded really cool in my head, and then once it was on the page, looked terrible and made no sense. We'd have to fix it, things like that.
So we're almost out of time, so we're gonna quickly, Jamie, tell us about your rewriting process, and then Ryan.
It was pretty simple and straightforward. Got the edits back from the editor. They were pretty simple. She decided she wanted endnotes for the book, and so I had to go in and grab those. That was different. I didn't have those in books 1 or 2, but I'm glad I did. And what I did for my own website is I created a /resource section. So if somebody gets the print book or one of the other formats, and they want to, actually go in and read those articles, they can click the link and go directly to the article. And so, that in a sense spurred, a whole resource section with other guides and get people from the book to the website. So I was glad in a way that happened. The normal copy editing and layout and all of that. And I wish I had a collaborator. That would have been pretty cool, but I worked with the publisher and they were pretty great to work with.
Ryan, was it brutal at the end there?
No, it really wasn't, and I think that a lot of that had to do with, a lot of these were already, these things were already published, and I had a lot of great newspaper editors at the Journal and at the Register who kind of had me stay in my lane, and I kind of had a tone established and things like that. So, and I was definitely on the same page with the editor, the publisher, who, wanted it as we had presented it. I think I had to write an extra chapter at the end at the last minute, if I recall. The copy editing was very intense and very thorough, and I thought it was really wild that I had no idea who that person was. They were just the copy editor in this document. I don't know if they do that so that we don't get mad and knock on their door and yell at them or something, or if that's just the way it was just forgotten to introduce us. But that person was very nothing escaped their attention or questioning. And the editor was more a guiding thing. I think you need a transition sentence in this paragraph, or all right, now you need one more chapter at the end. Really, but it was pretty basic. But I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that so much had already been sort of vetted and edited, and I had a template for how to keep everything, both structure and down to individual sentences and tone and things like that.
Well, your success has really been inspiring for us, and congratulations on your awards, but mostly thank you for sharing your experience here with other would-be authors. Thank you, Eileen. You're wonderful. I couldn't have done this without you because you're good at this. If you've written a real estate book that was published in 2021, you can be here on the stage next year, NAREE's next conference. If you could get your submission to the Bruss Book Contest by the deadline of May 15th. Let your colleagues know about this too. The Bruss Book Awards competition is open to all authors who have written hardcover and paperback books, ebooks, as long as they're on real estate related topics, books about home buying and selling, mixed-use development, urban and suburban redevelopment are all fair game. Entry forms are at NAREE's 15th Annual Bruss Book Awards program. Entry forms for the program can be accessed at NAREE.org starting on February 1st.